podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Maxine Bell, podcast manager for the AC, and I'm delighted to bring you this introductory series exploring mental health in coaching, aimed at both coaches and supervisors. I will be talking to coaches, supervisors and experts in this field to inspire and inform you towards better supporting your clients, as well as taking care of your own mental health and well-being. You will gain invaluable insights and practical tips, both for your professional and personal development, to help you coach better, building resilience and understanding in a stressful world. We will be discussing sensitive topics, so do take care of yourself and ask for help from a friend, colleague or professional if you need it. We will be providing a list of helpful resources and contact numbers on our webpage and in the show notes on the podcast channels, but do check your local area for help. Though informative, this podcast does not replace professional help or training. I'm joined today by three wonderful guests. The first is Calleja, who has 35 years experience in business, education and leadership development and has an MSc in management science. She's an AC accredited executive coach and master coach supervisor and an accredited and registered practicing psychotherapist and clinical supervisor. She supervises cross-professionally coaches and therapists and therapeutic coaches. She's also the AC Supervision Lead for Engagement and Development, helped to develop the AC Supervisor Accreditation Scheme, developed the Virtual Friday Reflection Groups and Supervision Special Interest Group, set up and leads the AC Mental Health Wellbeing Interest Group, and co-created the strategy to provide resources to support coaches and supervisors when mental health issues arise in their practice. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much. What an eminent introduction. I really appreciate it. And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Anne. And my second guest is Whitaker, who is the director of Whitaker Consulting, an AC accredited master coach supervisor, and has over 15 years supervising both one-to-one and groups, including Oxford Brookes University students doing their MA in coaching and mentoring practice, ILMS 7 executive coaching PG certificate. Her portfolio covers coaching, team, group coaching and coach supervision, mentoring and facilitation. Her early career was in human resources and she has experience at board level, various NED roles and an MBA, and she has co-authored 2 5-star rated books published by Routledge on coaching supervision and peer supervision in coaching and mentoring. And we'll put links in the show notes for those books if you'd like to know more. But welcome, Carol.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the introduction, Maxine. Glad to be here.
And our final guest is Dearbhalla Baveira, who is an accredited executive coach and accredited coach supervisor with the AC. She has 2 key areas of focus in her coaching: emerging female leaders and conscious leaders, and offers one-to-one and group supervision, often using creative approaches and nature for deeper reflective practice. She's here today because in 10 years of coaching, Dearbhalla has seen an increase in anxiety, overwhelm, workplace-related stress showing up in coaching, and more recently, more menopause-related anxiety and overwhelm. As a supervisor, she sees coaches frequently bringing inquiries about mental health of clients to supervision. Welcome, Dearbhalla.
Thank you, Maxine. Lovely to be here.
Right. Well, I'm going to start with the World Health Organization Constitution, what it says about mental health as just an introduction to this topic and well-being. It says health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. An important implication of this definition is that mental health is more than just the absence of mental disorders or disabilities. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And mental health is fundamental to our collective and individual ability as humans to think, emote, interact with each other, earn a living and enjoy life. On this basis, the promotion, protection and restoration of mental health can be regarded as a vital concern of individuals, communities and societies throughout the world. That's quite a long definition. I know you're going to make a comment on that in a moment. But I just wanted to read some statistics that I came across. It's estimated that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health disorder every year in the UK, and 1 in 8 in the world live with a mental health condition, and that's the ones we know about. And also what surprised me was that this came from the statistics that you've discovered in your mental health SIG, Anne, that non-traditional mental health offerings, which includes coaching, was a total of 46% of solutions to mental health problems. So that's quite high, and just really emphasised to me that coaching is a very important part of mental health well-being. And if we go to you first, I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on that definition by the World Health Organization is, and what your understanding of mental health is, and why it matters in a general sense.
Well, thank you, Maxine. I think, as you felt, it's a bit of a mouthful. And of course, the World Health Organization is going to be addressing clinicians, medics, and people and academics as well. And also, perhaps they come from what I call a moving away from, that mental health is probably something, it's more, they talk it in a way of being unhealth rather than health. And so within the coaching profession and within the group we put together, we wanted to put it in more of a context of the whole, the human, the whole person. And also to say that it's not the role of the coach to diagnose, or in fact, a therapist does not diagnose. And also in terms of coaching, we're not saying that people are going to be therapists either. So we put this definition together just to put things in terms of that context. So it was more of a well-being approach than an unhealthy approach. So in the guidelines, we put that mental health, well-being, considers the person as human, a whole being, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so therefore being at ease with oneself and the context within which we exist. So being able to relate and respond and navigate appropriately to the situation. So in that way, being able to self-regulate, reason, problem solve, and have impulse control. And within that, be creative and persevere with wisdom and a broad window of tolerance. So we felt that that was more fitting, both linguistically, but also to us as practitioners, coaches and supervisors.
Yeah, it does feel a much more human and grounded definition to me. In fact, human is in your first sentence. So, yes, I just wondered, Dearbhalla, did you have anything you'd like to add about what you consider mental health is?
Yeah, it's interesting just picking up on what Anne said towards the end of that, this broad window of tolerance. And this is where some of the things that we see showing up in coaching, maybe that window of tolerance has reduced somewhat, and it's the whole person. This is where we started the conversation with, what happens when mental health shows up in coaching as it does, because we are human. There may be work factors, maybe personal factors, and somewhere on the continuum of mental health. And so that more grounded definition, I think, from the AC really is helpful for coaches and for supervisors in terms of where we find ourselves and where we allow ourselves, where we find ourselves able to go as coaches and supervisors when mental health shows up.
I was just thinking that for some people, they may not understand the term window of tolerance. Would one of you like to explain what that means a bit more when we talk about window of tolerance in relation to mental health?
Well, this is my interpretation, and I'm not going to go down the clinical route, but for me, it's about being able to be resilient, and it's about resilience. It's the extent to which we can have the resources within us to recognize when something is going to be more of a stretch for us and when it's not. And then when we are confronted with something which is maybe a bit more stretching for us, we have the inner resources to be able to, what we call regulate, rebalance ourselves, to be able to deal with the situation rationally and logically. So it's about being able to, in terms of fight flight, or some of you may have heard of the polyvagal theory, it's thinking more about how we access the prefrontal cortex, or we call the executive thinking part of our brain, which is at the top of our center of our heads, which is about the part of us which is able to be at ease with ourselves and the world, to be able to listen, have feedback, to be able to deal with ambiguity. So it's being able to access that part of our brain rapidly given the situation. So that would be about increasing the window of tolerance and therefore accessing inner tools and resources to be able to cope given the context. So that's my explanation.
Dearbhalla, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I might come in on this. It was quite a new term for me, actually, within the last couple of years that I came across as a coach, supervisor, and a human. And I saw it coming up quite frequently in the context actually of menopause discussion and perimenopause discussions, where anxiety levels may have increased and people were a little bit more reactive, maybe harder to control emotions. And then that, could very lead to even more, kind of self-doubt and questioning oneself, and even perhaps suicidal ideation, that kind of the anxiety really decreasing the tolerance levels. And I often talk about comfort with discomfort, being less able to hold discomfort or stressful situations. And so when the window of tolerance is narrower, we may be more reactive and less able to self-regulate, as Anne was speaking about. It comes up in so many different areas. I find it a really interesting term too.
Yeah, it comes up a lot in trauma, I think, that one. So I'm guessing each individual as well is how they extend that window of tolerance, how fast they're able to do that's going to vary from person to person, I imagine.
Absolutely. It depends very much on people's experiences and how we make meaning of our experiences, and how those experiences influence, our decision making in the moment. And that will be different for everybody. And certainly when you talk about trauma, which I know is coming up in the series, is that when people are coding and remembering trauma, which is perhaps enabling them or affecting them, so that they are more hypervigilant, it means they are naturally going to be less resilient. They're going to be more on edge all the time. And so therefore the adrenaline and everything else, all the hormones are running riot in our bodies, and therefore we're going to naturally be less focused. So it's being able to rebalance ourselves. And I think, I like the way that Dearbhalla explained it, having the narrow window of tolerance and then opening it up so that we have those resources, even through breathing and settling and grounding ourselves, learning that to do that, immediately rather than having to think about it.
Carol?
Yes, really. I was thinking of it from the point of view of the coach and the supervisor, how we've already said the whole human turns up, and there's also recognising we as coaches and supervisors are human. We provide a safe space for exploration, and so it's how do we help people recognise what's happening to their clients, but also recognise what may be happening to them, and how we can give some support and some guidance so that we can make the best use of that time and space. And I'm not really surprised that figure of 46%, where would the general population go to actually talk about some of these things? And we do say that, coaching is a really contained space there that people can explore. And we already know that mental health is really on a continuum. It can change from day to day. It can be, and it's how we help supervisors and coaches recognise this and what they can do. But recognising the good that they can do in just listening and being there, actually allowing the person to voice that thing and be able to process it.
Yeah, and what I'm just going to say, and what's interesting with that is that coaching and supervision is that safe space, and so therefore, when that research was done was through Deloitte, it was for workplace executives. Therefore, I think it seems my interpretation is that coaches are now seeking that relationship to be able to share their vulnerabilities, which maybe in the past they couldn't. And it may also be because there's less availability on the NHS, for example, too. So it's inevitable that this is going to come into the coaching or the supervision space.
And you can't separate someone that into different compartments like that, can you? That this is your goal setting part of you, and this is your mental health, and this is your physical. As we've said, we're human, and we're holistic. We come as a whole, which is something you've mentioned in your definition. And so I just wanted to ask as well, if we can define then, what do we mean by mental illness? And because the language we use is important, I think, in regards to mental health, and people's understanding of mental illness may differ. how do we differentiate between that sort of normal stress response or something more serious?
Yeah, just really to say from a general point of view, and I'm not a trained counsellor or therapist, so I'm coming as an ordinary coach or supervisor. It is about the ability of the person to cope with the daily life that they've got, and you as a supervisor or a coach, allowing that space for them to explore it, but also being able to feed back some of what you notice, because it's that bit of helping people more self-aware and being able to at least look what's happening to them. So I think providing that space to explore and actually knowing as coaches and supervisors the boundaries for our capabilities. So being able to recognise what's happening and being, it's a little bit like you would say from the airlines, making sure you're self-aware of what your abilities are and what your circumstances. You can put your own mask on before you deal with other people. So that whole bit of having a very sensitive and caring approach to it so that you can help your clients explore that. But I'm sure there are also other things in therapy and counselling where you would actually add more to it. So Anne might want to add something to that.
For me, the word illness, is that not more about a medical diagnosis? And of course, we have labels. And nowadays on social media, the internet, so many people will be doing self-diagnoses. And those labels are for a reason. And they're in the various DSM-4, and I think the latest one is the 5, for clinicians in order to be able to prescribe and diagnose. Well, as coaches, we're not in that realm. In fact, even as psychotherapists, we're not. I think it's to do with it is a spectrum, isn't it? Because some of us could function. For example, somebody could be, for example, stress is not a mental illness. Stress is a condition. And stress would manifest itself in very different ways with different people. So how do you know that somebody is suffering from stress? It could be overstress. It could also be under stress. But also, if it is left, say, for example, unrecognized, and it could then lead into a mental health issue. For example, if somebody was over time was continuously in a situation, let's use the work situation, at work for a long time, a lot of examples going through COVID, where you had, the nursing profession, medics under continuous amounts of stress for a long duration, where they're lacking sleep and everything. Well, then it wouldn't surprise me if many of them are not actually now suffering from PTSD because it was continuous. Whereas if it's a one-off stressful situation, it would probably be adrenaline leap, get on with it, and then recover. But the thing is that if it's such a stress of the adrenaline on you over a long period of time, literally our batteries run out. And so we will be depleted and we won't be able to recover. So I think that's where we can say some people can actually tolerate different levels, of different situations. Now, it could also be that, for example, financial worries, which are happening a lot at the moment, it could be through grief, loss. So those could be contextual or situational, and maybe over a medium length of time. Or it could be because somebody's lonely. And Dearbhalla has mentioned, changes in lifestyle in terms of age, going through everything in our life cycle causes the change in jobs. So there's various circumstantial things which affect us all in different ways. I wonder, actually, would it be helpful just to give a little example of something?
Yes, I think so.
This is a particular person I was coaching, highly functional, very busy office manager, a small company, small employer, so lots and lots of pressures, multitasking all the time, working very long hours, working both from home, working from the office, working long hours, very demanding MD, etc. This was continuing through COVID and also had problems within a relationship personally, outside of work. And this was when they came to me because they felt they were underperforming at work, had just lost it, couldn't cope anymore. And then what happened was I became a bit concerned because one day they said they were driving in their car and they just went blank. So this was a sign for me. And now, as a therapist, wearing my therapist's hat, I said, "Did you stop the car? What happened?" They said, "I can't remember." So this person was inevitably probably suffering from what we call shutdown dissociation. They had actually ignored the signals in their body of tiredness, and on exploration found actually drinking gin and tonics at lunchtime to cope, eating badly, not sleeping. So these were issues in the end, over that period of time. They had come to me knowing I was also a psychotherapist as well as a coach. So we were able to recontract and also say this person really needed to talk to work, to get time off work, be signed off by the GP and, go under a GP supervision, and also to recontract for much deeper psychotherapeutic interventions. So the person did actually negotiate 3 months off work. And as far as I know, I think they're probably still off work now. And one hopes they'll go through occupational health and have a phased return to work. But this was very typical, where somebody on the outside was masking. They were saying, "I can do it," and they're saying, "Yes, yes, yes," because in fact their identity was who they were at work and was very professional, but underneath was completely and utterly falling apart and was in denial. But because this became, fortunately, they'd come forward for coaching, and we were able to work out a therapeutic support plan for them that one hopes they will be on the road to recovery. But I think that's an important example of when somebody had not listened. So that became more a mental health issue than a performance issue.
And it's not, unfortunately, these days, it's becoming more of a common story, Anne, isn't it? So it's a really good example. Dearbhalla, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Anne, for sharing that. And I think it's such a great example. And both Carol and I we don't have a therapeutic background. And so it's so interesting, I think. We often talk about the 3 C's, our competence, capability, and capacity as coaches to know where we can go. And so Anne was able to spot some of those factors that caused a kind of a bit of a red flag and concern for her. And sometimes, it's really having that awareness as coach, where sometimes holding the conversation and giving the person space to talk and to be listened to and express their concerns is enough. But that point of being able to spot where that concern is and really trusting your intuition as a coach to go, "I'm a bit concerned here," even if I don't know what the therapeutic solution might be, and whether it is that then, you might start talking about what other support could be brought into place. Is there some referral and getting to a point where the coachee is comfortable thinking about, okay, are there other things that might need to be considered, helping them to think about what that might be, and then being able to refer if possible. And then also as coach, knowing at that time that it's really important to bring that to supervision, because you may not know whether you're handling it correctly or not. And so important to be able to bring that to your supervisor, speak about it. And you may have handled it the way that you'd have liked to or not, but we can always come back and circle back on that, I think, with the client to make sure, there is a duty of care, I think, of the coachee and also yourself as coach. And sometimes these things are really quite big to hold as ourselves. So
absolutely. And, I was concerned because, I had, not just for the person, I had a concern that, I didn't want to be seen to be passing them on to somebody else when we had a really, really good trusting relationship. Because sometimes when you sort of say, "Oh, I can't cope with this," and I have to refer, the person can actually feel rejected. But because, we had that trusting relationship, we were able to explore far more. And I think what is so important is the client needs to have autonomy. The client needs to decide for themselves what actions they want to take. So by discussing it openly, giving options, thinking about, and also having a plan in place whereby they knew that I was still there to hold them safely, contain them until they got further, more in-depth help that was more appropriate to the professional relationship. Then the person did feel very held, and maybe they come back to me at some stage, and that's fine.
And just to pull it back a little bit, because I'm aware that some of our listeners are almost beginners when it comes to the idea of bringing mental health into coaching space. And I've certainly, in coach training, seen a lot of anxiety with new coaches or even experienced coaches that haven't really dealt with this before. And so I'm just wondering, obviously it's becoming quite clear in our conversation why it's important for coaches to maybe start to have a basic understanding of mental health concerns. But can we dig a bit deeper into that about why you think it's important for coaches to have some basic understanding of mental health concerns and what that actually means in reality in a coaching session, what sort of things they might be looking for or doing, but also as well, maybe after that, more into supervisors and if they have a maybe greater responsibility on that level. So if we start with coaches in general, and then we can sort of look more closely at supervisors.
Well, I think, similar story to Anne's really, and I don't have the background that she has. I had a client who was very stressed with her job. It was career coaching. She just started a new job. She was head of finance, so lots of responsibility there, and there were issues around the firm. And she brought also that she was having a relationship problem. And we talked about it. I fed that back to her. So I actually said back to her what she said to me. And she said, yeah, I'm finding this stressful. And I said, what else, as you've already mentioned, where are you getting support? And she talked about a bit of peer support she had from other colleagues, and also on a personal level, and that she had thought about therapy. Did she need therapy? So she'd already started to think about it. So we taught her, and I asked her what she wanted to do, and was the coaching goals that we had, was that something she could cope with given the other things that were going on? And we decided on a mutual pause. So she still felt supported, and I contacted her a few weeks later just to see how she was doing. She really appreciated that. We haven't come back to the coaching yet because there's still more things for her to work out. But, even without the background, you can, as a coach or as a supervisor, notice what's going on. Some of it is that bit of ability to feed it back and help raise the person's awareness and to give them that you're happy to talk about it. I think this was probably the first time she'd voiced some of those things. So again, don't be afraid. If you notice things, you can feed that back, whether it's something the person says or something you feel in yourself. Sharing that knowledge with your client can help them and you see where you are with that client.
Using your coaching skills, actually, good questions, reflecting back, listening well, all those normal things, but also being honest as well in the right way, of course, is really important. Like you say, don't be afraid, because it'd be worse if you regret not being honest about what you might feel is going on. But the important part you gave me there was it was the client who actually made the decision. You just provided an environment to help them make a decision, which reiterates what Anne says. So that's good advice, Carol. Thank you. Dearbhalla, would you like to add anything to that? Some tips for coaches?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this quite a lot over the last year, especially in this working group around mental health and well-being, and honestly, I struggled with it a little bit myself to figure out where I came into it, and thinking about this competence and capability and how do we know that it's not a blind spot for ourselves? You may be a coach thinking, well, I'm fine, I can handle this, but can I? And I think there's a couple of things for me, having that self-awareness, maybe, as a newer coach, you have those course coaching skills, as Carol was saying, and that we can hold that space. But you might feel a little bit more vulnerable in that situation, and being aware of the competence and capability where you are, and also your own capacity as to what's going on in your own life. I think as a more experienced coach, we can probably hold more. But I think in terms of a practical tip, and there's so many, there's webinars, there's podcasts. I think it's really incumbent on coaches now, with this coming up as a topic more and more, to be informed and to really engage in all of the CPD that's being provided, whether it's on suicidal ideation, trauma, addiction, neurodiversity, not for the purpose of diagnosis, never for the purpose of diagnosis, but to be informed. And it may help to ground you as a coach. So when these things come up, it's like, okay, I know the right questions to ask and how I can hold it because we're a little bit more informed. I think that's really important at this time. And there's so much more in terms of CPD that's being provided at this time.
Thank you. Self-awareness and be informed. Anne, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think what's important that sometimes, and this happens with some of the new coaches that I supervise, the eagerness to do something, the eagerness to feel that they're returning on the employer's investment and that they're doing something tangible, but actually just listening, being present for the person is enough. And maybe new coaches is to recognize that actually sometimes less is more and they don't actually have to do something. The doing is actually in the being.
Yeah, it's a very important point and actually holds a huge amount of power. And, I've worked as a nurse, as a midwife. I've worked with all sorts of different jobs like that where just sitting with someone is enough. It really, really is. It's not an airy-fairy thought. It's a true experience. And if you've ever been on the opposite end of that, where you've been in a space which somebody's held for you, you know that experience. So, yes, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just quite simple. Carol?
Yeah, I think as well, we can help our clients reflect. I mean, how many people consciously reflect on what's happening? And this is something that I think we can really help our clients do. I would usually ask for a reflection after a session. I very often will talk to people about how they reflect and whether it's written reflection or whether they use something else more creative. And as a coach, you can then bring that into your next session. What did you reflect? What have you learned from the last? So all of those things, we're helping to build the client's range of skills and tools that they can use to help them. So I think, that bit of reflection and, as has already been mentioned, I think by both Dearbhalla and Anne, is as a coach, taking those issues to your supervisor, whether it be one-to-one supervisor, peer supervision. There are lots of different ways to get supervision too and support and help. And recognise you're part of a profession and you're not on your own. There's a lot of resources on the AC website. And as you've mentioned, further CPD will help you to gather more tools.
And I must say, Carol, through the podcast in recent months, the emphasis on supervision has got stronger with coaches because coaching is now diving a bit deeper. It's evolved, it's progressing all the time, that pretty much every conversation, supervision comes in as the place where coaches grow the most, where they get nurtured the most, where they learn the most, and obviously where they get to reflect on the work they're doing with clients, importantly. So it is a bit of a switch from location to supervision with coaching. It is an investment, isn't it? And it's for yourself and your clients. So if you wanted to say anything else about supervision, but I think when it comes to mental health, it's a really important part for coaches' support, isn't it?
Yeah, Maxine, I think the other thing is, these skills that we've got, sharing them with our clients so that they begin to reflect. There's a real value for them. So many leaders are quite isolated out there. This is, whether you call it supervision or whether you call it reflective practice, it's a useful skill for people in lots of different ways. So, yeah.
Just to build on what Carol says, is that I think supervision in the past was seen as an auditing role. And I just want to bring in about self-care. This is about fitness to practice, that even ourselves as supervisors, coaches, psychotherapists, we need to put ourselves, self-care for ourselves into this. And of course, supervision is a very good place for that because you've got that trusting relationship and it isn't shameful. And I think we're now past, saying we just get on with it. We actually need to be able to share our own emotions, issues that come through that we're picking up from our clients, because we're human too. So supervision of supervision is just as important as well. And certainly one of the reasons, if I can bring in, we wrote the guidelines for supervisors because we felt that supervisors, and this is where these conversations first started, because supervisors were identifying that more coaches were bringing to their supervision not only self-care for themselves, but also the impact of the pandemic and other worldwide things that are coming into for all of us as well in terms of vicarious trauma. So it's becoming a much more challenging spectrum of things for coach supervisors to cover. So hence we've started with the guidelines, and there'll be further things to follow with that too.
And if I could add, I think that these guidelines are really important for coach supervisors, and that coach supervisors can bring some of that to their coachees. I think part of why I became involved in this work as a newer coach supervisor, I was aware of people, as you mentioned earlier, Maxine, coaches bringing, my clients are bringing these mental health issues. What do I do? Where do I go with it? And so it can be a bit of an ethical dilemma. And the one thing we know about ethical dilemmas is very rarely a clear-cut answer. And so I wanted to be sure as a supervisor that I had kind of a stance or where I could land in terms of when coachees brought these. And the guidelines are really solid. They're a really practical container for things that we need to reflect on as coaches. And it was really robust conversations that took place to get there. There was disagreement. There was, it was a really, really robust process. And I think I would really recommend any coach supervisors to access those guidelines. It's on the Association for Coaching website. Of course, it's not just for AC members either, but all sorts of things came up from that capacity piece, CPD, even contracting, how we recontract, so that we can have a stance. I think that's what I've gained from it personally, knowing where to go and feeling safe for myself as a coach. So I feel resourced in helping coaches to resource themselves when mental health and ethical issues come up.
Absolutely. It's those conversations, because I think saying the fear, it's the fear, which in some respects, fear is a good thing because it means we're self-aware and we're aware of the impact of things, the risk that could happen. But there's also that the fear shouldn't be limiting. And as long as we're self-aware and we're observant, we're considering changes in voice tonality, if you know the person you're coaching over a period of time, body posture, any potential masking, behaviors that come through, any nuances, even somebody getting a bit snappy or being late for meetings or being a bit short, withdrawing. These are all the kind of things that day to day as coaches, supervisors, we can pick up. And that's where it's just reflecting those things back. Okay, if they're wrong, that's fine. At least the person can come back and say, actually, no, it's just that I was up all night because, we were babysitting or, got a new daughter or whatever, up all night with that, or nothing to do with overwhelm at work or anything. It's just circumstantial. But if it is something that's a bit more in depth, then at least opens up the opportunity that somebody can talk if they wish to.
And so you've mentioned the AC guidelines. Are there any other resources out there that would be good for coaches or supervisors to look at so they can investigate a bit further what we're talking about?
We are putting together some resources, and we can come back to what we're doing for the future within AC. Of course, there's the mental health first aid training that I think is recommended, although that is more in terms of, I think, interventions. I haven't been on the training myself, but I think people say it is very helpful. There's a lot of reading, lots of resources and books to read. There are lots of courses. Really, the list is endless. So there's no shortage, really, of information around.
You reminded me, Anne, of one of my clients who was exploring this area of, where could they get help in addition to the coaching. And I mentioned the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists, BACP. That's a good website as well that has, if you are looking to refer somebody, there is a directory of qualified therapists and counsellors on that. And again, that website does have some information about it. There's just look at as many sources as you can. People will choose to read stuff that means something to them, that equates with them. So don't just confine yourself just to the things you've looked at before in the past. But your colleagues and peers can be good, exchange things. Again, we talked about supervision, but supervision can be one-to-one or it can be in a group. So, these are the sorts of things you could raise in a group where you actually then get other people's knowledge, as hopefully this conversation we're having today is helping.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this series, aren't we, to give people some basic information, but encourage that curiosity and for people to not avoid this issue, but to go and gain information, to gain confidence through different forms of learning and supervision. So that's actually why we're here today in many ways, isn't it? To help coaches address some of their concerns and fears and lack of knowledge as well in this area, and supervisors as well. Yeah, I thought the AC guidelines were really good. You shared them with me, Anne, and they're not complicated. It's not there's a lot of work gone into it, I think, to keep it very focused. So I do recommend taking a look at that.
And we're also going forward, we're developing member guides on more specific areas, which are much more probably skill-based and some psychoeducation. And we've got more podcasts that you're developing as well, and in more specific areas, and webinars. We've also got coaching perspectives. There's been quite a few articles already published in coaching perspectives on mental health in coaching. So it's ongoing, and there is a wealth of knowledge out there. I think to access the CPD Hub and BACP, I think you maybe have to be a member, but there are plenty of other, online events, Science, and there are training providers who are associated with the Association for Coaching anyway, where there are providers out there. So it is a bit of a needle in a haystack, but the main thing really is that if people are interested in a very specific area, is to research that one area and maybe take a course, follow modules in it, do some research, just to develop their own CPD.
Coming back to supervision again, I think that there's a nice view on supervision. You might work with a supervisor one-to-one or in group supervision. And I like the idea, I've heard of it recently, of having a number of supervisors that you can tap into. So, for example, if mental health is showing up in your coaching with more frequency, you might identify a supervisor such as Anne, that's maybe a dual practitioner, has the coaching and therapeutic background. So you have it's like having a number of people, it's your tribe of different people that you can go to resource yourself in different areas of your practice.
Carol, did you want to add something?
Just really confirming what Anne said. Yeah, the basic BACP website does just have some general information. It's not, you can't access deep information without being a member. But I've certainly used it when I've needed to refer somebody, of giving that individual the opportunity to search a little bit themselves.
There's also a counselling directory, which is where you've got a much broader set of psychotherapists there who are also coaches, and they offer different modalities than BACP. So that's a good source, and it's easy accessible if coaches want to look for counsellors as well on that site.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. That's good.
There are lots of general websites open to the public on topics of like anxiety and stress and depression and things like that as well, that you can look at, aren't there, as well. And certainly in this podcast series, it's an introductory series, and we will be doing more through podcast digital learning, as you know, Anne. So, watch out for those. We are aware that this is a current issue that coaches and supervisors need support with and need information about. So, that's what we're trying to provide. And I just wanted to go back, and this is a common question probably for all of you that you get in supervision, is where are the limits and boundaries as a coach? And I know this may vary, and this is probably an important point on somebody's previous experience and knowledge as well, be different for individuals, but where are the limits and boundaries, and how do you, as supervisors, how do you guide coaches with that?
Well, for me, it comes back to the 3 C's. It's really to do with, the contract, the capability and the coach's needs. And this is where what we're doing is creating awareness of competency, Because unfortunately, there is a syndrome, but I like to say it simply: the more that you know, the more you realize you don't know. And quite often, new people going in will say, "Yes, this is something really juicy. I want to learn about this." But actually, no, this is about maturity. It's about the maturity of knowing, and how far it may just be gut or intuition that you just know there's something that is going beyond also to do with the contracts. Who are the stakeholders, who's involved, what's the system, if inevitably the whole person will bring a lot of stuff in, but it's up to then, the coach and also the supervisor to actually bring it into context and say, what does the contract say? For example, this was some years ago now, when I was working on a program with chief executives. It was actually to develop, encourage for female leaders and chief execs. And at the time, I was not trained as a psychotherapist. I was working as a coach. And the person that I was working with was actually a psychotherapist and also had moved into the other area. I went from coaching to therapy. They went from therapy into coaching. And they were working with a chief executive, and this chief executive they divulged that their father had just died. And so actually the therapist dived straight in and said, "Oh, sorry about that," but then started to probe. And the client said, "That's crossing boundaries. That's not part of this contract." And actually the person was reported. So I think we just have to be very clear about what is in the contract and actually where, because it may not be appropriate, because just because somebody else had experienced a bereavement doesn't mean to say that the other person is actually experiencing the same at all. And so bringing in that personal, empathetic, seemingly approach may not be appropriate at all. So again, it's just about maturity and considering the needs of the client and saying to yourself, to whose benefit does this serve, this intervention?
And I might add on that, really interesting, Anne. I think in terms of boundaries, we have to pay attention to our own boundaries as well as coaches in terms of our capacity. We might have stuff going on in life, whatever that might be, that may impact. It could be health, it could be mental health, it could be bereavement, whatever is going on, that may impact our capacity to be able to hold at some state. At sometimes we might feel more able to hold and other times less. And really important to have that awareness and recognize our own boundaries and where we may need to, reflect on that. What could be resourcing ourselves, or it may mean, looking at the type of work that we're doing and shifting that a little bit. But important to notice our own boundaries around that as well from a capacity perspective.
Well, it's interesting actually. There was a question that came up through the webinar a while ago, was if somebody brings into the room something that I'm going through myself, how do I handle it?
Mm-hmm.
Could be to do, say, for example, fertility treatment. It could be bereavement. It could be many, many things.
I guess that's a moment, Anne, where you have to be really present as a coach with what comes up for you in that moment, and staying present with the client, having to slightly for that moment push aside. And then afterwards, is that what you would do as a coach? Is afterwards, then you've got time to sit with it, take it to supervision, talk to a friend, whatever it is you need to do. But in that moment, you're present with the client, and you do have to put your own, not notice it, but not let it come into the room too much with that client to impact what you're doing. It's probably one of the most difficult situations in some ways, depending on the issue that comes up and how big that is for you personally as a coach. Yeah. There's some really interesting thoughts and insights, I think, to get this series going. We will be covering some topics. It's an introductory series for everyone listening, but we will be covering, as an introduction, topics on trauma and trauma-informed coaching, suicide ideation, stress, anxiety, depression, and also an episode at the end about your own self-care as coaches. So we hope that will give everyone a really good grounding. Before we leave, though, would you like to sort of say, if anyone would like to talk to any of you further, where they can reach you? Let's start with you, Dearbhalla. How can people reach you?
So probably the best way, complicated name, Dearbhalla Baveira, so I mightn't go there. My company website is Clearbird, ClearBird, clearbird.ie. I'm based in Dublin, Clearbird Coaching and Consulting, or find me on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you. Carol?
Yes, you can certainly do contact me. I'm always interested in other people's views on it, and I collect loads of articles, so I'm very happy to share them. It's Carol at whitaker-consulting.co.uk is my email address, but I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free.
Thank you. And Anne?
Thank you. I'm a bit more complex because I wear two hats. I have my executive coaching and supervision website, which is theleadingbusiness.co.uk. And my email is anne@theleadingbusiness.co.uk. And if anybody is interested in personal coaching and more of the therapeutic coaching and supervision, you'll find me on pureconsulting.com. And it's where I separate out the two businesses, because one is more for personal and therapeutic supervision. And then the leading business is for the executive coaching and coach supervision.
And this will all go in the show notes on our website, so don't worry if you didn't catch all of that information. Just before we end, though, I mean, I found it really interesting. There's some really simple points that you've given about reflection and about listening and normal coaching skills that hopefully will give people the confidence to at least be able to use those coaching skills they've already got and hold that space. But I'm just curious, have you got any final thoughts or pearls of wisdom that you'd like to share before we leave today? Carol?
I have a checklist for myself when I contract or recontract. And just to say, because I've become more aware of this, one of the subjects there under confidentiality is health. And so I will, when I first contract with a client, be it a coach or a supervisee, then it will be one of the things I talked about. Is there anything somebody wants to share? Just to say, there is an increase, they may come across issues, and, we've all got to look after ourselves too. So I've woven it into my initial contracting that there's a possibility. Not everybody will take that up. Sometimes, it's fine, but it's just starting to actually put it on the table that it is okay to talk about it, but also talking about my background and where my capabilities are.
Thank you. Dearbhalla?
I hope from this podcast series that people take away that sense of reflection to think about where am I on some of the topics that have come up today, and think about what's their stance, how do I respond or react when some of these things might come up, and how can I resource myself, whether it's CPD, etc. And I think it's a continuum. I don't think we ever arrive at a point, but keeping this kind of active curiosity and reflection to be informed so that we can, both from a self-care perspective and in service of our clients as well.
Thank you. Anne?
I think just to build on what both Carol and Dearbhalla has said, it's about being aware of the impact of yourself on your clients and being fit to practice self-care, being sure that you are being of your best self in service of your clients. And although coaching is not regulated, it doesn't mean to say that we're not professional. And that for me is really important, and hence why we've been doing this work to ensure that members are informed as best as possible, so they have resources and support of where they can come to should they have, certain dilemmas. And it's having this continued dialogue that we all learn. We're all still learning. It's developing day by day as we speak. Our roles in society are moving and shifting. And the more we have this dialogue and collaboration, the more that we can all learn and improve, the work that we do, and help support others to be the best they can be.
Yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you, Anne. Yeah, that collaboration, which is what we're doing by you being on the podcast, actually. So that's wonderful. And I come from a safeguarding background, and I, just being accountable, being humble to what you don't know, reaching out for help when you don't know, I think is really important as well, not to be afraid. It's okay if you don't know. So I hope that I feel that we've really given some really nice, simple points and for reflection on this episode. So thank you all much for your knowledge and wisdom. Yeah, it's a really great start to the series. So thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thanks, Maxine.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our page at www.associationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.